At the end of the college football season, there was a debate between if Georgia was now the kings of college football and they were better of a program than Alabama. Ohio State was not in that conversation. What does Ryan Day need to do to make Ohio State the kings of college football? That's the question. We, both of us, have answers during today's show.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Friday, February 10th in the year 2023, and this episode is brought to us by our good friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. During this episode, our guy, Jeff Hunt is back. I told you we're trying to have a Ryan Day-themed Friday show during the offseason, and Jeff Hunt is here for a conversation we could talk hours about, but we're limited on time during today's show. My guy, Jeff Hunt, welcome back to Locked On Buckeyes.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jay. It's good timing too. I'm really it's been enough time. I've been able to digest the season. And though anybody that listens to your show knows that, I was disappointed with it, but yet it's been enough that I'm starting to recover. I'm starting to build the anticipation of next year. I'm starting to think about the spring game. We touched on that a little bit. And so I'm in a good place right now to talk about a coach that I've probably maybe undeservedly criticized for the last, 12, 13 months, but I'm here for it, man. I'm ready.
I hope Ryan Day's ready because this upcoming is going to be very, very big for him during his career at Ohio State. Not saying that he will not be one of the top two coaches or the best coach in the sport, but I do believe, Jeff, the upcoming season is pivotal and special for him. I will tell you this as well. I feel a lot better today than I did at the beginning of 2023. With the way that game ended and the loss to Georgia, I was not really in the best of moods. We did a show and discussed and got some things off of our chest, had our very own therapy session here on the show. But it's all Ryan Day. I do think Ryan Day could have made some decisions, even during that last drive, which could have helped the Buckeyes win the game. He could have done some things previously in prior games to help better prepare the team for that game. Ultimately, 11-2 the last two seasons. CJ Stroud said that's not his standard, but that is a mark the 2 years that he was a starting quarterback at Ohio State. In regards to Ryan Day, with it being a Ryan Day-themed Friday show, we mentioned at the top of the show, the king of college football, to me, is still Alabama. I still think Nick Saban has that, but there is a discussion that is Georgia now the king of the sport. I, for years, have thought Alabama, the mark is on their back every time they're there. I don't know if Georgia has it all that just yet because Nick Saban is what he is. Ohio State's not there. Ryan Day's not there. And that's where the question comes in, the thought comes in, what does Ryan Day need to do to make Ohio State the king of the sport? And Jeff, I'll tell you, with this upcoming season being very, very pivotal for him in his career, if Ohio State wants to be the kings of college football, they better play like they want to accomplish that goal in 2023.
Yeah, that's exactly it right there. When you first asked me this, I'm like, man, what a great question. What a great topic. And it's something that all Buckeye fans are thinking about. Like, man, how do we, it's crazy to think that we've got a program as good as Ohio State. And yet we all know collectively, most of us, that there's still another hurdle. We can't get over that. We thought, in 2014, we're like, okay, we're here, we're past it, we're on to the next phase. And then just, a few more disappointing postseasons, end of the seasons. And then the last couple seasons, starting to, lose to the rival. I mean, it's going to be 4 years, since we beat Michigan when the game starts next year. These are things that you can't overlook, but then there's also a playoff win in there. a great game against Georgia. I think that's the sticking point is like, how do you evaluate the game against Georgia? If you evaluate it as, that we're almost good enough to win a national championship against a great team, that's great. If you evaluate it as we lost a game that we clearly should have won, that's another thing. And then that's where it comes down on Ryan Day. So that's the biggest part of this. It's like, just like you said, it's 11-2 isn't good enough if you want to be the football factory that clearly Alabama and Georgia are right now. Clemson was it for 6, 7, 8 years. I'm not saying Clemson's done, but they had, they've had a couple what we're going to call down years, and still pretty good.
Double-digit win seasons are down years at Clemson. That's a lot for what they were 20 years ago.
But also, just real quick, like, look how things change. Like, we're talking about a Clemson team that a few years ago was on top of college football. Yeah. They get blasted by Ohio State.
Yeah.
They don't make it the next year. They've got a big Notre Dame loss on their schedule. So in a matter of 3 seasons, everybody's looking, side eye at Clemson. Like, that's how quick this stuff comes apart in college football. And that's why what Saban has done in Alabama, and why I agree with you that they're still the king of college football, is like that letdown season. This was a bad season for Saban. He lost 2 games at the, at the gun, and blew away a team in a PCS game.
Jeff, I'm thinking about what it's going to take for Ryan Day to lead Ohio State to being the kings of college football. I could go different areas in the sport. I could go to the coaching and the coaching staff and the players and the development. It starts with recruiting. One thing Nick Saban has down pat and does very, very well is recruits at a high level. And if it comes down to a recruiting battle, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama, USC, Alabama, Oklahoma, Alabama, Texas, we all believe that at some point Nick Saban's going to win most of those battles. Now, Jeff, when it comes to Ohio State and Georgia, Ohio State, USC, Ohio State, Alabama, sometimes Ohio State, Clemson, the belief that I have in Alabama and Nick Saban winning some of those one-on-one battles with the other top programs in the sport, many people don't believe that Ryan Day and the football team is going to win those battles. It all starts with the players that are on the team. Now, I'm not saying guys that aren't super high in the recruiting databases won't come in and be stars. I'm not Chris Olave, 3-star. What was he? What is he now? Him and Garrett Wilson broke the NFL record.
He's already a good receiver. Yeah.
Yeah, so like they're breaking records as rookies in the NFL because of what happened at Ohio State. So it's not all about the stars, but recruiting matters. And I do believe, Jeff, there's a reason why people don't believe that Ryan Day and Ohio State are going to win all of the recruiting battles. They might win them with guys in the Midwest or guys in the state of Ohio. When it comes to national guys, even prior to the NIL stuff, not everybody believed Ryan Day was going to win those battles. So I think, Jeff, with this, what does it take for Ohio State to be the king of the sport? It starts with recruiting, and it has to be elite at every position every year.
Well, and the biggest thing is, we'll get a little specific here. I'm just going to kind of, piggyback on that, is that you have to start recruiting at the defensive line. You have to start recruiting at the front 7 level. Ohio State has like 0 players on their team that are anywhere close to what Alabama put just at the linebacker position. The 2 linebackers that they had. Yes, Will Anderson, we know he basically pound for pound best player in the country. The guy beside him is just as good. It's not even in the ballpark of that yet for Ohio State, and you have to start. We have to get more cornerbacks. We have to get more length. We have to get more strength, more size. And when another thing about recruiting, and we can see it when you're watching the game, and this is going to sound really rude, and I understand, but just what I see is like Saban, the guys that play for Georgia, like, it just feels like they have a better sense of winning football, understanding of the game, playing of the game. And then when they get to the next year, they're so smart and so good. And now I will say this, Ohio State's offense has done a little bit of that. Like,
yes.
The receivers have been very good. Running backs are what running backs are. Like, you can't judge Ohio State on the running backs just because the offense they run, which is a whole other discussion, but we can't get sidetracked just yet. So they have done a good job. The offensive line, it came together pretty good last year. I think they performed pretty well against Georgia. Really not that bad against Michigan, this season. But it's like you got to have – you only need a couple. But you needed – Ohio State should have an NFL player at every depth of the defense, if nothing else. You got to have a NFL Pro Bowler on the line. You got to have an NFL Pro Bowler in the linebacking core somewhere, and you got to have one in the defensive backfield somewhere. And they had that for a lot of years, and that got them through so many games, won them championships, and that's just not there right now.
It's not there. It was there. One position, speaking of you talking about the front seven, and I talked about this on the show before. One thing Urban Meyer did, both at Florida and at Ohio State, he had elite linebackers. Physical linebackers, quick linebackers, very smart linebackers, great lateral movement, sideline to sideline. They are exactly what you want. It wasn't just at Gainesville, also in Columbus. Ryan Shazier being one of them. Urban Meyer always had elite linebackers. So Jeff puts an emphasis on the front seven. I think that they've done somewhat okay, not as good as I would like, but pretty good at D-line.
Yeah.
The drop-off to me at every position as far as recruiting has been at linebacker. You want to talk about the recruiting? Year 2, year 3, you have guys that aren't just trying to be all Big Ten players, all Americans that are going to get combine invites, that are going to wow NFL executives and NFL people at the combine and during these one-on-one meetings prior to the NFL draft. The linebacker recruiting, Jeff, needs to get better. And I'm not going to stop saying it till it happens. Like, it could be 2-3 years from now. I don't care who the coach is. If linebacker recruiting does not get better consistently, then I'm going to be here on the podcast saying it needs to improve. Because as great as Will Anderson Jr. is, and as good as you want to have Brian Brzee at Clemson, you want to have that elite linebacker that looks at the quarterback and says, hey, whatever you do, I'm going to mirror you, and I'm going to get my defense ready for whatever your offense is doing. Elite linebacker play is needed for Ohio State to be the kings of the sport.
Yeah, and just real quick, just an example of that. If you just look at the NFL right now, you've got guys on the Cincinnati Bengals, that started for that 2014 Ohio State team. You got Darren Lee, who was a great linebacker for you. You got Raekwon McMillan, who was on his way to a really good career and has had some injury troubles. But like, that's just an example of that's the type of players that were on that championship team. There's no way you can look at this past year's Ohio State defense and be like, oh yeah, they've got 4 long-term NFL players on it. That's got to go up. And then my biggest thing, and you didn't touch on it much, but we all recognize player development. These guys, like that's cool that you had the Instagram post and the Twitter post of you in the uniform committing to Ohio State. But 3 years later, if you're the same player, I'm not putting it on the player, because here's what you're telling a player as a coach: come here, we're going to make you the best we can. We're going to win championships. We're going to send you to the NFL. It's going to be great. And it's really not happening like we thought it should, because like even the wide receivers, if you take a step back and look, like, are they really different than when they got there? Like, is Marvin Harrison Jr. really better than when he got there, or does he just have to tread water until he can go to the NFL? And Jigba was great game 1. He's just that good of a receiver, so that's great for recruiting. But they didn't make guys into NFL stars. They're just taking great talent, using it for what they can until they get to the end, almost like a basketball team does sometimes. I need these players to develop into monsters, like, to throw a name out there, Jack Sawyer, JTT, even good season, but he, at the end of the season, with all those games under the belt, he wasn't. Did he look like, did you think, I'll just ask you this real quick. Did you think JTT could have played for Georgia in the national championship game this year? Do you think he could have been on the field?
No.
So he's good,
but no, I don't think he could.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
If your best defensive player can't play for the team you're playing.
I mean, honestly, if you think about it, Jeff, if you put it that way, not just JTT, what Tommy Eichenberg played.
No.
Like,
no
I'm
offense,
being honest with you. No, I'm being like, we're just being legit and saying Defensively, a couple guys. Eichenberg, some people said he should have been an All-American. JTT had phenomenal flashes in games. That Penn State game is one I'll be talking about for years for the plays that he made. But if your best guys can't play you on the team that won back-to-back national championships, then you see why there's a gap between Georgia. And I even think at Alabama, Nick Saban's going to be like, look, buddy, chisel up a little bit. Cut some of that baby fat. I'm just being real with you. No nonsense coaches down there, and we see why their programs play the way they do.
And then what could Georgia do with a guy like Hall, with a guy like Mike Hall?
Oh my gosh.
He's a first-round NFL player at Georgia, right? So there's our development. Mystery. And I know everybody right now is listening, and they're like, well, that's defensive coaches, that's this coaches. And that's the second part of my thing is like, Day, if he's going to coach at Ohio State, he cannot be like figuring it out on the fly. Like he has to develop a culture like Saban does. When a coach goes to Ohio State, an assistant coach, they ought to be like, they're going to get a head coaching job in 2 seasons, just like Saban's guys do. Like that's the culture he has to develop. Like no more like, oh, they're figuring it out, or there's no 5-year plan at Ohio State. Like going into next season, Noel's defense should dominate, everybody on their schedule until they get to the playoffs. Day's offense ought to dominate everybody until they get to the playoffs, because that's what Georgia does. That's what Alabama does. And we're just not at that level. So we're talking, these guys work for Day, so to speak. So like, yes, we're putting it on the defense. Day is in charge of their boss. Offense, Day is in charge of their boss. Just like, another nitpick of mine is like, Day's offenses need to learn, and it sounds crazy, they got to slow down a little bit. You got to learn to smother teams. If you go back and watch how Alabama won that BCS game, their bowl game, that's how you just smother teams. Like, I don't remember what the score was, but it could have been 70, but instead it wasn't. But they just took their time. Like, you don't always, like, you can tone it back a little bit. Give your defense time to adjust, time to think, time to react, time to figure things out. Like, you don't always have to. I always said this, when you run these hurry up offenses, the defense has to hurry up and get back on the field. And you got to recognize your weakness. You got to slow down a little bit. You know what I mean? Your quarterback might not throw that 60-yard touchdown pass. He might throw a 5-yard out. But these are just coaching things in game to figure out, how to play together. Just like this week we celebrate LeBron James, NBA scoring title, whatever. And everybody says the key to LeBron James' career was that he knew from the get-go, get his teammates involved, because that's how you build a family. That's how you build a team. That's how you build a relationship. And like right now, I think there is a separation between Ohio State defense and Ohio State offense. They do not feel like a unit, as to where if you watch Alabama, like they get it. Like if Alabama's defense needs a rest, like that team will just go out and run it 3 yards in a cloud of dust, get a touchdown. It might be a 7-minute drive and give them time. Watch the Philadelphia Eagles right now. Great example of how offense and defense just understand, what the other one needs. Like you are a team. And right now, Ohio State feels split down the middle. It is literally like watching 2 different football teams when they're on the field.
You mentioned player development, and that's one thing you and I have talked about even away from the show, about player development needing to get better at Ohio State. I'm going to do a positive twist on this and spin, because I still think it needs to improve all over the place. I don't know what went into DeJuan Jones falling in love with football after year 2, but him last year and this year, not him being a starter, but him in his development, because to be honest with you, coming out of high school, I never thought we would get this DeJuan Jones. I thought he was going to be a guy, play football, good, but I did not think you're going to get DeJuan Jones to be this good with the massive body that he has. I did not think you're going to get DeJuan Jones right tackle, being somebody that NFL scouts are saying, is he a round 2 guy? Is he a round 3 guy? Is he a back end of the first? I mean, these are legit conversations people are having about DeJuan Jones.
Like he would be drafted for his physical ability more than what he did on tape.
Exactly. So I do want to give him credit, because I do believe he was developed by 2 different coaches. Some people said Coach Stud, previous O-line coach, wasn't that good. Then you get a guy in Justin Fry, who's a phenomenal teacher of the football for the offensive line, and he saw some growth from DeJuan Jones. So even though I do believe, and I'm with Jeff, player development needs to change, all over the place. DeJuan Jones is a bright spot in that conversation because I do believe he was developed in some ways as a football player. Jeff, I do want to say something that you kind of hinted at, and I want to just take it to a conversation I had with my then girlfriend, now fiance, while watching an Ole Miss football game. It was Ole Miss versus, I think, Mississippi State. We were not, I think I was in Indy, she was in Kokomo, an hour apart. We don't live in the same town, so my weekends are literally back and forth, back and forth. And we're watching a game. It may have been the Egg Bowl. And she looked at text message. She sent me a text and said, these players down south look different. Now, that statement was something that me and Jeff or me and Mo might say, that's our terminology. But yes, my fiance did use that. These players down south look different. And I do believe when you look at Ohio State, they look different than other players in the Big Ten. Like, they look different sometimes over the Michigan and over Penn State. They don't look different than Alabama and Georgia. Even sometimes at Clemson, South Carolina, they don't look different in a positive, just physical eye test way. So I do think we talk about player development. How about the development of the body? Because I do think there are questions about the strength and conditioning program at Ohio State that need to be answered or fixed. Because if you want to be the king of college football, which I do believe that's what every Ohio State fan wants, Ryan Day wants to be the best and the top of the sport, fix the strength and conditioning. Because if my fiance, who's not a football person like Jeff and I, wants a whole lot more football since her and I have been together than she probably has over the past 5 years, she sees it. We see it. That means these coaches around the country, they see it as well. Strength and conditioning needs to improve for Ohio State to be the kings of the sport.
Yeah, I love this topic. We tweeted about or text about it, back and forth all year. And this is a great example. And this is what I said about Georgia. Georgia had they had the stinker against Kent State. They had the Missouri game, and everybody's getting on them like they're not what we think they are. And I was like, yeah, but Kirby Smart had the guts to build a team that was ready for the playoff run. Like, he knew he was going to have a couple nail biters throughout the season because you can only score so many points, but he knows when it gets late in the season and you need guys to be able to drum up something extra and you need to be able to push for yards and everything, that it's going to be there. And I correlate it like Ohio State is built more like how the Buffalo Bills built their team this year, which, here's what we basically call it. They built a turf team. And I understand this was what was tough about Ohio State for decades. They had a team that was made to win in October in Ohio. And then when they got to the Louisiana Superdome, they got mauled by these teams that could run around them.
Yeah,
I know it's tough to find that in between. Kirby Smart's done it better than anybody I've ever saw. Saban also, Saban actually, teams caught up to him a little bit when they got to the turf and everything. He still won the games, but out on the grass in September, his team was just going to beat the snot out of you. Ohio State's got this team that's it was ready for Clemson, in 2020, and that's great. But when they play Michigan in the snow, they get beat up and they get pushed around. So Day's got to be able. This is what I'm talking about, slowing it down. Day's got to be able to understand, hey, you may only beat Maryland by 17 or whatever, or whoever. But when it comes to the playoffs, just like in 2014, and they got, in 2014, when they got to Oregon, they pushed that team around, they beat them up, they punished them. Zeke Elliott, was physically dominant, and it was a mismatch. So that I understand, but when you talk about how do you get to that, could these coaches got to figure this out? You have to build a playoff team that it's not going to be the prettiest thing in September, as opposed to where Ohio State is just off the charts, that time of year, and that's fine. So, that's one of my biggest things. And it is all conditioning. It's all the players you pick. You need guys that can run, but you need some thick guys too. You need some booty. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just got to build a wall. And what was Ohio State missing at the end of the year against Georgia? They couldn't close the game out physically, and Georgia's defense didn't wear down. And then you look at what Georgia did 2 weeks later or a week later to TCU. Those guys look like that was the first game of the season. So and I'm sure Ohio State, like a week later, I do think they could have beat TCU, but they would not have looked that fresh, and they would have been beat up, and they'd have been, Harrison wouldn't have played, and all these things. And not that Harrison's injury is because of his physical fitness, but I'm saying like you take it to a team. You know what I mean? Georgia won the playoffs because at the end of the season, they were fresh, they were strong, and they were fast, and they were ready for it. And Ohio State, when they got to the Michigan game, got pushed around again.
They did. Jeff, we're out of time. I wish we had way more time to go over this and discuss it.
I said I was going to be in a better mood this week, and we still just wound up complaining about our 11-2 team again. I swear I like Ohio State. I'm just 47 years old, and I'm running out of time, Jay.
Guys, a standard is a standard, and neither Jeff or I plan on lowering that standard anytime soon. Jeff, I want to open the floor up to you. Leave any kind of last thoughts you have about Ryan Day potentially leading Ohio State to be the king of the sport, and then also let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter as well. The Bird app's been weird, but Jeff is still firing off the tweets like he always does.
Yeah. Twitter's funky right now. I've warned everybody. Here's what I would say. If you got friends on there, get their personal number, because we don't know how this thing's going to go. Thoughts on Ryan Day? I really honestly think he's a brilliant coach, and he's a great coach. It's just that he doesn't have the ability to learn at Ohio State, but I do support him. I'm with him. He's a kind of like me. He's a little edgy, rubs people a little the wrong, a wrong way. He doesn't always listen to the outside noise. But as Jay said, the clock's not just ticking, the clock is thumping. And also, if you get a chance, this is kind of during Super Week here. We got Super Bowl coming up. The Off the Ball Network that I'm semi-retired, but I'm still a part of, is doing a lot of Super Bowl coverage this week. And then the NBA stuff is ramping up. Shout out to LeBron James, an Ohio guy, for breaking the all-time scoring record Tuesday night. That was fantastic. So yeah, just engage on Twitter at JHunt006. Check out the Off the Ball Network. And of course, keep listening to Jay. Us Buckeye fans don't deserve a guy this, well-rounded, this well thought out, this logical to broadcast for our team every day. It's a gift.
Guys, my last thoughts about Ryan Day. I have been critical of Ryan Day, but I do believe there is a possibility he has a chance to lead Ohio State to be the king of the sport. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take maybe some philosophy changing. I do think him potentially not calling plays in the fall is a step in the right direction for him and Ohio State to be the best football team they can be. 11-2 the past 2 years, it's not the standard. And I think that if Ohio State wants to be undefeated, conference champions, beating the team up north, and winning a national championship, Ryan Day needs to be a better overseer of the entire team. And I think him not calling plays, potentially not calling plays in the fall, is a step in the right direction for that to happen. You can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. If you want to email me, send your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. We're always looking for topic ideas from you. I have a notebook full of them, but I want some of your ideas as well. Slide into my DMs on Twitter or Instagram. The handle is the same, at jstevens07. If you don't want to deal with the socials, email me, jstevens317@gmail.com. I will not only see your email, I'll also reply to your email. I'm not somebody that's trying to not be in touch with the fans or the listeners of the show. We're out here for the day. That's Jeff Hunt. I'm Jay Stevens. Ryan Day Friday is done for the day. We'll be back next week to have another Ryan Day Friday, and you have no idea if there'll be a guest on the show or what we'll talk about, but it will be something that will help Ohio State be the best football team in college football in 2023. Jeff is back. We got to end the show in the way that we do every single time. OH.
I-O, baby.